Today we live in a world where you get taxed when you earn money, taxed when you spend money, taxed when you save money. And every year Uncle Sam sends you this letter and says, hey, I need you to fill out this form to find out if you owe us more taxes or we're going to pay you a little bit back. And on the opposite end, they tell you, well, if you don't itemize your deduction, we're going to go ahead and keep the difference. And if you make a mistake, we're going to fine you. Can you imagine a world where you get to keep your entire paycheck, where April 15th is just another spring day? No more trips to H&R Block, no more audits, no more W-2 forms and 1040s. Tourists, criminals, and illegal aliens are going to start paying into the federal tax system. The Fair Tax can do all that, and I'm going to tell you how. I should tell you that I'm a proud owner of the Fair Tax book and the Fair Tax the Truth. I'm also a member of Americans for Fair Taxation, which you can reach at www.fairtax.org. Today I'm going to talk to you about the problems with our confiscatory tax system, how the Fair Tax can solve our tax dilemma, and I will also describe life under the Fair Tax and how you guys can become involved in the grassroots movement. Our nation cannot continue on its current course of income taxation without paying the price. Today I will begin by explaining the hazards of the income withholding system. The inefficiency of our tax system has doomed it to certain failure. It is inadequate and it is unethical. From the IRS.gov, in 2006, the IRS said that it collected $2.5 trillion in taxes. At the same time, USAspending.gov said that the government spent $2.8 trillion. You do the math. Speaking about Social Security, David M. Walker, the comptroller of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, said that at current rates in 2040, the federal revenues will be inadequate to pay the interest on the federal debt. To put that in more layman's terms, that means that without lowering government spending, increasing taxes, or cutting benefits like welfare, Social Security, and Medicaid, that eventually the IRS won't be able to collect enough money just to pay the minimum due line on the bill. By the way, as a side note, the government hasn't decreased spending since Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society in the 1970s. Current tax laws are also inefficient. While taxing earnings, criminals and illegal aliens are not subject to taxes, so only honest citizens are the ones that pay the tax load for the rest of us. In a most recent report, 2001, $345 billion went uncollected by the IRS. Businesses and consumers also spend $278 billion just to comply with the tax code because it has 9 million words in it. And the current system also levies heavier taxes against higher wage earners. That means that businesses and entrepreneurs make decisions based on how to stay away from taxes and whatnot instead of how to make more money. Fair Tax, the Truth says that that's costing our gross domestic product, how much money and whatnot we make in the United States, $2 trillion every year. There's also $12 trillion sitting in offshore bank accounts earned honestly in the United States but won't be brought into the states because of the tax code. The income tax is also unethical. In Fair Tax the Truth, it says that politicians like to fund little organizations and projects of their choice by giving them a tax exemption rather than a spending bill. If you guys have heard of earmarks lately, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Politicians also like to play the game of class warfare. They say things like, well, we're only going to raise taxes on the rich. What they don't bother letting you know is that wealthy folks structure their income so they get paid on dividends from investments. Those are taxed at lower rates than income from wages is taxed. Another example is the hike on corporate taxes. Dr. Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, said that corporations don't pay taxes. They collect taxes, but they don't pay them. Basically what happens is corporations raise the price of their goods to compensate for the raise or the hike in taxes. This is what they call embedded taxes. And most importantly, politicians love the withholding system because they have your money before you even realize it's gone. At that point, you don't depend on it anymore, so you don't even think about it. Having discussed the failures and inadequacies and ethics of the income tax, I'm now going to describe to you the advantages of the Fair Tax. The Fair Tax is a transparent bill in Congress that's designed to replace all current federal taxes with a national retail sales tax. This plan is revenue neutral, progressive, and will promote economic growth. The Fair Tax replaces the current income tax and all the taxes in the Fed with a 23% retail sales tax. This tax will be levied only against goods and services sold at the retail level. Businesses to businesses will never pay taxes, and used goods will never ever be taxed. All Americans always know that their tax burden is 23%. That's easy. You also get to choose when and if you want to pay taxes and how much after that. The fair tax is revenue neutral and progressive. It basically means it's going to replace the current system and give the government just as much money in the future as it did yesterday. It also includes a prebate check that eliminates the burden on the poor. That makes it progressive. The prebate check is to compensate for taxes you would pay on the cost of living, like going to the grocery store and whatnot. Basically, once a month, you're going to get a check for estimated $188 per person every single month. The fair tax will also lessen evasion and promote economic growth. Basically, the fair tax is harder to evade because only businesses collect the taxes. So it shrinks the collection base from just businesses instead of everybody around the nation. Criminals and aliens will also begin paying tax to the federal government because right now they're not taxed on their wages, but when they go down to Best Buy to buy their TVs and rims, they're going to pay the fair tax. U.S. goods are no longer subject to embedded taxes. That means when they're exported, they don't cost nearly as much. And imports from other countries, when it comes to the United States, they have to pay the fair tax. Having told you about the substitution of the fair tax, I'm going to tell you about life underneath the fair tax. I slightly borrowed this from the Fair Tax the Truth, but stop for a second and imagine. Let's say up until now, all of us have lived under the fair tax and that's all we've ever known. Up until now, every week when you got your paycheck, you got your whole paycheck and no deductions. You've never had to keep tax records, you never had to keep receipts. You've never paid taxes on investments, never paid taxes on savings. Every time you go to the store, the price tag says $1. You get your receipt back, 77 cents for the item, 23 cents for the fair tax, you paid $1. You also receive a check in the mail every month to cover the basic cost of living right up to the poverty line. You can also choose to pay taxes to the government this year by your frivolous spending on televisions and shoes. The next year you can save all your money after the basic necessities of life and there's no penalty at all. We've never heard of the IRS, a W-2, or 1040 reform, and the banks have never reported our financial business to the federal government. So along comes this politician, he says, hey, let's replace this retail sales tax with an income tax. You say, cool, no problem. Under the fair tax, the more money I earn, the more I spend. The more I spend, the more taxes I pay. Well, not exactly. The more you earn, the higher the tax percentages are going to be. Well, fortunately, businesses are going to pay taxes too. What the politician doesn't tell you is that businesses simply raise the price of the good to compensate for the taxes, and you're going to pay the taxes anyway. There's not going to be a prebate anymore, but we'll have exemptions. He fails to elaborate any further about that. Investments are going to be subject to capital gains taxes. We're also going to have this thing called a death tax. So when you pass away, your family's going to pay taxes on the estate that they just inherited. You have to start keeping records of your finances, spend hours preparing tax forms, or you can just pay somebody else to do it. Mistakes are going to be fined, plus interest. And Uncle Sam suddenly has access to all your financial records to make sure that you're paying your fair share. No one could ever sell this tax system to the people of the United States. So obviously I'm hoping that this contrast has showed you what the advantage of a fair tax is. So the fair tax sounds like it'll make life better and easier. So you ask, so what now? I've weighed and measured the fair tax. We found it both wanting, and I've covered the benefits of the fair tax. The first thing I have to ask you is, you need to go down to your local bookstore and pick up a copy of the Fair Tax book, or the Fair Tax the Truth by John Linder and Neil Bortz. On top of that, I'd like you to go down to the website, www.fairtax.org, and register with the Americans for Fair Taxation. And lastly, before you leave today, I would like you to sign a letter to your congressman and mail it to him and basically say, hey, we need your support for the fair tax. The fair tax is the best solution to solve the impending doom of the income tax. It's the most heavily researched tax legislation ever in U.S. history. I hope today this message has convinced you to support the fair tax by word of mouth, if not by action itself.
Yeah.